Hey all you cool cats and kittens, it's Keegan from the Otis Photo Lab, day whatever of quarantine. I hope you are all safe and well. In this video, I'm going to be walking you through the decisions I made while processing this color negative. I've already gone through and put multiple layers on this image, making adjustments and decisions to give me the final product that I want. I'm going to go through each layer and describe why I made certain choices. So starting with my background layer, I duplicated that using the hotkey Command J, and I inverted it by selecting Command I. And that gave me this image. And this layer is what I use to go in and spot my dust. You never want to make direct adjustments to your original background image because that's what's called destructive editing. You're going to save over certain things that you might regret later. So it's really great to leave your background alone and just make a duplicate layer. The next thing I did after making my duplicate background layer is I put a curves layer on top. And with this layer, I selected my histogram and went into each color channel, the R, G, and B, and brought in my endpoints from the shadows to the highlights, just to the edge of the histogram. This balances the colors. It's a great place to start. And I made a slight curve on this layer. I didn't bring in my endpoints too much for my overall histogram, just enough to get, a basic image to work from. So the next thing I did is I made an adjustment layer just for the face of the person I photographed. This is my curves layer number 2. And I just increased the contrast by bringing in the endpoints for my overall histogram and bringing down the shadow details a little bit. I did this because I want her face to really stand out. To me, she's the main focus of the image. But you also want to make sure that it feels cohesive and natural. The next layer I made was an adjustment layer for the snow and the snowman behind my friend here. And I wanted to bring up the brightness, make the snow appear a little bit more white. And similarly, I didn't adjust the color balance in this. I just adjusted the curves layer. I brought up the highlights a little bit with an anchor point. And to make an anchor point, you just click a specific part of your histogram and drag. And the next thing I noticed is that her pants were kind of fading into the background and I want them to pop a little bit more. So I made another adjustment layer. And again, I just increased the contrast a little bit and the brightness. The next section of the image that I wanted to adjust was the house and the forest in the background here. And with this one, I did adjust the color balance in it. I noticed that there was a bit of a green cast over this part of the image. A color cast is when there is a color imbalance on the image, too much green, too much magenta, too much cyan or red or yellow or blue. And you're kind of tweaking your histogram to come to a more neutral color balance. So this is before and this is after. As you can see, I brought in a bit more magenta and a bit more contrast by making a nice S-curve. The next section of the image that I wanted to adjust was her coat. So if I select that, I increased the contrast and I added a little bit of cyan. And I did that by making an anchor point on the red layer of the curves. In addition to adjusting the red layer of the layer mask, I also threw on a little bit of an S-curves just to increase the contrast. And at this point, I wanted to add a bit more contrast to the overall image, so I just threw on a new curves layer. I didn't do a layer mask, and I made a slight adjustment. I also added some blue to the image by dragging in the highlight end of your blue-yellow layer of your curves. And then I noticed that something weird was kind of happening in the bottom part of the image. So I threw on another layer mask using the rectangular marquee tool. So I threw that layer on and I feathered it so that it would kind of fade more seamlessly, because originally it was just a hard rectangular layer mask. So I made it feather for about 550 pixels and I increased the highlights slightly. And then I noticed that the grass in the foreground of the image just had some weird things going on. So this is one of the more intricate layer masks that I made. So if I select the backslash key, I can see what is selected and what isn't. I just wanted to add some magenta and some red to this section of the grass because I found that without it, it just looked kind of garishly green. I wanted to subdue that slightly. The next adjustment I made to this image was a layer mask which affected mostly the snow and the house in the foreground. I left out the sky and the forest in the background. And for this layer, I just wanted to increase the brightness slightly and adjust some of the colors. So before it was a bit more yellow and magenta, and I wanted to balance that out a little bit. Then I realized that I kind of neglected her shoes in these adjustment layers, so I went into her shoes and I brought down the highlights slightly. Another thing I did with this is I brought in the highlight endpoints for the red, green, and blue layer. Then I noticed that the house still wasn't where I wanted it to be, so I threw on another curves layer and I was adjusting the colors there, just working again with my endpoints. And I knew when I shot this image that it was right around sunset, so there were some pretty interesting things going on in the sky in the background. So I threw on a layer mask for just the sky, and I brought down the highlights slightly. The next adjustment layer I made was for my forest in the background here. I just wanted to darken it a little bit. And the last adjustment layer I made was for her eyes, which is not very noticeable at this scale, but this image is about 40 by 50 inches at full resolution, so in a print like that you would be able to see more detail. So this is with the adjustment layer and without it. Her eyes, I just wanted to brighten them up a little bit. So yeah, I hope you guys found this video helpful. Stay tuned for our next one.